Hello and welcome to the CX Files for 7th of March 2024. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
And I'm Peter Ryan, usually based in Montreal, Quebec. But Mark, as you know, I'm coming to you today from a hotel room in beautiful London at Sloane Square, believe it or not. It's great to be back in London, being able to reconnect with so many friends, etc. The industry is alive and well. And as we join each other today from my remote location and your home location, we've got a real guest and a half, I think, this week in terms of a topic.
Yeah, it's certainly good. And it seems that you haven't been listening to Elvis Costello and one of his most famous songs, I Don't Want to Go to Chelsea.
Elvis Costello is very much one of my favorite singers, and I've always appreciated his music. That's not a song I know, but I know what's going on my Spotify right after this call.
You can check it as you're leaving Chelsea anyway. Okay, so why don't you tell us about the interview you did with Lollie Mancey over in Dublin then?
Yeah, so Lollie Mancey is somebody who I've been following on LinkedIn for some time, Mark. Now, for those of you who don't know, she is probably one of the best thought leaders when it comes to elements revolving around entrepreneurship, when it comes to looking at what's going on in digital technology and resilience. But also, what's really struck me is Lollie's discussions in LinkedIn around health and wellness. And it got me to thinking a little bit about what that means for our industry. You know, she is the program director at the UCD Innovation Academy. She's somebody with a great business background, a great academic background. But really, I think the thing that really hits home for me is the extent to which she has been discussing some very uncomfortable questions. Questions about what should the work-life balance be? What should people be thinking about when it comes to managing their anxiety levels and their stress levels? What's causing them anxiety in their work life, and how is that transposing over into their personal lives? How is it impacting pretty well every aspect of their lives? And I thought I'd reach out to Lollie to find out if we could have a chat with her for maybe some ideas about best practices when it comes to managing stress, managing the work-life balance for organizations and for executives who are working in CX all the way down to the frontline staff. And it was a fascinating chat. You know, Lolly is one of these individuals that doesn't come from our world. She doesn't come from a customer experience management career or background in that sense, but she certainly brought a lot of common sense to the table that I really hope our listeners are able to pick up on and really to follow moving forward.
Yeah, and hopefully, I think that it's interesting because this industry doesn't have a very good reputation. If you look back historically, especially before the pandemic and when the focus was primarily in the contact center, then you would read a lot of horror stories about agents that are forced to do a certain number of calls per hour, not allowed to even go to the bathroom without permission. And so even though we've talked to enough people and visited enough contact centers to know that most of these horror stories are not the daily reality in most places.
No.
But at the same time, just the fact that this is the impression you get in the business media means that this is something that needs to sort of be seen to be taken seriously.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things that came up over the course of my chat with Lolly was the fact that there are certain hints, there are certain indicators that team leads or mid-level management should be looking for within the agent community. What could be triggers for a mental health episode? What could be an indication that somebody's not feeling well from the standpoint of being overly stressed or having that stress turn into exhaustion? And as we all know, stress and exhaustion can turn into depression. The reality is, in 2024, this industry must change. It must change in terms of how it empowers agents to manage their work-life balance. And Mark, you and I know enough executives in this space as well to know there's so many people who aren't managing their work-life balance at the managerial or the decision maker level. And that's got to change as well, because otherwise the health outcomes are certainly going to be more on the negative side.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that as we're seeing more automation on the kind of simple interactions and more of a focus on the human element being more complex interactions, hopefully we will see, more respect, more agency given to the individual agents, to have more control over their time at work. So, just giving people more flexibility is going to make a hell of a lot of difference anyway.
Yeah, more flexibility. I think permitting people to empower themselves to try and figure out what they want to do, what they want to accomplish in a role or moving into a career in CX, and really providing the tools and the support and the guidance needed to be able to accomplish that. The reality is, as Lollie points out, overloading people with the tasks and expecting superhuman feats of work-like strength is just not going to be the watchword. What's going to be is making sure that people feel happy, that they feel healthy, and that they come to work with a positive outlook. And that means making sure that they're not waking up in the morning with high levels of anxiety and finishing up the work week, feeling exhausted and not being able to accomplish anything on the weekend that they might want to do in their personal lives.
Why don't we go straight to your conversation with Lollie Mancey?
Sounds good.
Well, this week's CX Files I've been looking forward to for some time. We are very, very fortunate to be chatting with Dr. Lollie Mancey, who is the Program Director for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at University College of Dublin. She joins us from her home in Ireland, and it's great to have you on, Lollie.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
So you don't come from the CX industry as such, and I think that's one of the reasons why I was so intrigued to bring you on. It's always good to get a 40,000-foot view of what's happening, broader economy-wise, broader multi-sector-wise. And the topic we're going to be discussing today comes down to wellness, and it comes down to wellness in the workplace. And I'd like to just sort of kick this discussion off by setting the stage, if I may. We're already a few weeks into the work year, into 2024, and thus far, I have been receiving messages from friends, from work colleagues in the CX space who are complaining about excessive workloads. They're complaining about going to bed tired, waking up even more tired, people who say that they're on the verge of burnout, and we're only a few weeks in after the Christmas break. So, Lollie, my first question is this something that you're seeing cross-sector, or is this restricted to customer experience?
This is right across every sector. Yeah. And I think it's a really interesting topic, because part of what my remit is in UCD in the university is to kind of futurecast and to try and create courses that bridge the gap between industry and education for the workplace of the future. So it's quite difficult to do, because you're hedging your bets a little bit on some trends or some assumptions of things that you're looking at. Of course, we can see more recently that sort of, AI, sort of took the metaverse in terms of what everyone is talking about and sort of, latest obsessions. But it does also raise some really important questions, not just about the workplace of the future, but the society of the future. What does it look like now? And what will human flourishing look like in 5 to 10 years? And where does work fit into that? So I'm an anthropologist in innovation. So the anthropology side is really interesting, because we not only just sort of look at the client-centered approach, and I would do a lot of design thinking sprints and things like that, but I'm constantly keeping one eye on this idea of human flourishing and how a society operates when the landscape changes. And so we're seeing a giant change at the moment. Of course, we had the pandemic that is feeding into some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. Not that anyone wants to talk about COVID anymore. Unfortunately, we still need to reference it. But it's really about that idea of we have a chance to redesign the way that we work and think. Are we doing that? Or are we just still trying to fit a square peg into a round hole? Because let's face it, what's happening at the moment is not working for people, which brings me full circle to what you just asked me. Work's not working. It's not fit for purpose at the moment. And I'm seeing burnout, but I'm seeing shorter phases of burnout or lead into burnout than ever before. And so it's, it's kind of, and for example, in my own job, I hit September hard. I now have to actually start to think back at the beginning of August How will I get myself mentally and physically prepared for the workload that's coming when I hit the term? So it never used to be like that. It used to be sort of a nice ease in. And now it seems to be, even in academia, we hit it like a wall, and it's just go, go, go. And I think that what the reason, and not just in my own profession, but the reason that people are feeling burnout already again, or the early signs of it in January, is they didn't have the rest they needed during the Christmas break. So,
I couldn't agree with
that's
you
very,
more.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I can't tell you. I shut down for about 2 weeks over the Christmas break, and I didn't do any work related stuff, didn't look at email. I came back and I could not believe the number of people that were sending me messages about
Mm.
work related matters. And like I'm not joking, even on Christmas Day. And I thought,
Yes.
you need to be able to almost shut down, to be able to let yourself go for a little bit, because the strain that I think people are under right now across industries is like never before. As you say, work isn't working for so many
Yeah.
people. And to my mind, this in the customer experience space, this leads me to my next question. And that is, when we're talking about these strains, we're talking about what can the impact be, say, maybe on a manager or a supervisor. But I think it's even coming down to people on the front lines. I mean, imagine
Right.
you're an agent. Imagine you're working in a contact center and you have people calling you up, customer anger and rage is like it's never been before. You're being shouted at for 8 hours a day. If you're, say, doing web chat, you're being asked to manage multiple concurrent conversations at any one time. Nobody can keep up.
Right.
I mean, really,
Right.
what we're talking about is a recipe for disaster.
Right. And so, from a sort of human-centered approach to all of that, this multimodal engagement that you're talking about is actually causing. So we're the first thing we're doing in the morning is we're picking up our phones, right? Literally the minute our eyes are open, we're picking up our phones. So as we move
Bingo.
through the different brainwave patterns, in an evolutionary sense, our brains are the most suggestible as we move out of dream state and sleep state into waking. If we pick up our phone as the first thing we do, and literally as my eyes open, I'm looking at my emails, which I also do, which I shouldn't do, which is a terrible habit. What we're doing is we're actually receiving a dopamine hit or a stress hit, regardless, depending on what we're looking at. If it's Instagram, we might get a little dopamine hit from a reel or something. If it's an email, we're actually getting a stress hit. Because our brains are so susceptible in that early state, what we're doing is making a sort of a distinction of how the rest of the day is going to go. So the best thing you can do in the morning when you wake up is to ease yourself into it by listening to some positive affirmations, which sounds lovely and fluffy, but actually it's true. This sort of idea of sort of, I am strong, I am good, I am grateful, and the very last thing at the end of the day is to spend at least 20 minutes at the end of the day just thinking about gratitude and going into a nice, gentle sleep. Sleep is a massive issue at the moment. And I think it's to do with our engagement. There's some terrifying research coming out about sort of Gen Z at the moment, or sort of future casting about Gen Z, that if we continue the way that we are with our social media and email and phone and screen engagement, they will be somewhere between 22 to 25 years of their life online. So who gets to the end of their life? I mean, people at the moment get to the end of their life and they would say, oh, I wish I hadn't spent some time at work, and I have some regrets about not getting to see my children enough when they were small, et cetera, et cetera. Right at the end of life, when people have that moment of reflection, who is going to say, I wish I spent more time on Instagram Reels or TikTok, So what we're doing is we're taking such a large percentage of our waking life, and these lovely apps and things that are meant to save us time and all of this lovely AI generated stuff, with the extra time we're accruing, we're plowing it straight back in again. And that's, not our fault. We're addicted. There's algorithms that are designed to keep us addicted. It's a little bit like a mental casino, where you're saying, okay, there's no window, so we don't know if there's day or night. It's to keep us there. So even with myself working in technology and with an anthropologist background and all of those different things, I have apps that tell me when I've been on my apps too long. I have one called Stay Free that just gives me a little notification, because you go into time blindness. They're designed that way.
Yeah.
So the burnout is coming from a poor sleep, potentially a sedentary lifestyle. If we're on screen all the time, we didn't evolve to be sitting, we evolved to be walking. So as a consequence, we're sedentary, we're suffering some health issues because of that. But our brains are never switching off. We're never allowing that downtime. So, when was the last time we were bored or daydreaming? When you go to a liminal space, like if you're transiting, right? Say for example, you're moving in transport and you're sitting on the tube or the train or the bus, everyone's looking at their phone. No one is looking out of the window. Your brain is never coming down to that level of rest. And this is why when we suddenly then go back into the workforce, it's just stress on top of a pre-existing stress that's already there. But it's a stress that we do voluntarily. It's
very much so.
I don't know the answer to all of this apart from a digital detox. Some people, there's a bit of a movement for people going back to those old flip phones that aren't smartphones, you know. And I think the idea, again, people being conversations I'm having at the moment about a lack of communication style for people coming through, going, don't know how to do small talk, don't know how to relate to each other. So, you know, we have to question what we're doing and why we're doing it. And as the technology advances, we have to have a look at what this idea of human flourishing will be in line with the technology, you know, and we have to be very smart and understand how it's working and how it's impacting us.
Very true. Very true. So put yourself in the shoes of somebody working customer experience, maybe the front lines of in a retailer, or maybe somebody working in a contact center. What should they be looking for in terms of signs that they are hitting that wall, that they're hitting that point of burnout, where they're almost getting to that point of no return? And what should their managers be looking for as well? What should the supervisory staff be thinking about in regards to making sure that people aren't in a position where they're going to be doing so much work that it's adversely going to impact their health?
Right. I mean, there's some very clear indicators, and the first one is decreased performance. You know, when somebody is under a lot of stress, they may be quiet quitting and just doing the bare minimum because that's all they can manage, or they may be disgruntled and that's why they're doing it. But for the majority of people, the burnout will come with a high employee turnover, that the job isn't working for people in perhaps its flexibility, or perhaps, you know, there's not enough thought put into employee wellness. And that's going to look like chronic fatigue, inattentiveness, irritability. You know, we've got people that are flying off the handle all of the time. We've got people that look upset. You know, how are people feeling? And so we need systems that are supportive. First of all, people need to know they can seek support without stigma. That's really, really important, because if you've got an HR, I was reading about, you know, the idea of wellness actually just on LinkedIn a minute ago, and someone saying, you know, the box ticking exercise of wellness, where you've got a manager saying, oh, we celebrate wellness here in our company, but we're in 20 hours of meetings a week, you know, on top of your work schedule. So, you know, it's gaslighting, basically. It's managerial gaslighting. So we have to also be allowed to set boundaries, and our managers have to help us set those boundaries to say what's working for you, what isn't working for you. Things like emails, you know, schedule sending. I mean, we've had this conversation a number of times across industries where people say, why do we bother having a bank holiday? We have actually one a month in Ireland. We have a new one in February for St. Bridget's Day, our first female saint's day. And we have one every month for 6 months, which is glorious. But I know for sure that I've got to do 5 days work in 4 days. And by the time I get to that Tuesday morning, I've got double the load of emails. So there's no break in that time. And it's the same with, like, you're talking about the Christmas break. If you're coming back from the Christmas break to 3 days worth of sifting through all of these emails, you're not able to take a break. It's why everyone I know takes their laptops on holiday. It's just not worth trying to switch off because there's no one looking at that. So ideally, is there somebody else that can answer those emails for you while you're away? So you're not coming back to this mountain, because we have this program in Ireland, a very sort of old-fashioned program called Glen Roe, and it's on a Sunday night. And it's at 6 o'clock, and you hear the music, and there's something in the employee mindset that's called the Glen Roe effect. And when people hear the music, they used to think, oh my God, no, school's tomorrow, or oh no, work's tomorrow. Do you know, some 75 to 80% of people dread Monday within the workforce. So it's the Glen Roe effect of hearing that music and suddenly being triggered. You can no longer enjoy your Sunday evening now because you're dreading the next day to come. That can't be right. That's not how it's meant to be for us. We're not meant to dread what's coming next. So, you know, I think in terms of, you know, managers helping, you know, workshops on coping skills, but also that sense of a manager being approachable and vulnerable and authentic about their own issues, that they haven't got everything sussed, that this is a team perspective rather than just just the old manager that sort of said, I'm approachable, but they're unapproachable because actually it's going to go on your record or it's going to negatively affect you. We've got to actually allow vulnerability, and we've got to allow for sort of human-centered vulnerability within the workplace. Now, I'm not talking about the snowflake thing that's sort of, where people say, oh, people don't know how to work anymore, and they're very sort of scathing of younger generations. I actually am very proud of Gen Z standing up to say, do you know what? No, busyness is not a badge of honor. I want a work-life balance. Because let's face it, for most of us, I would be Gen X. For most of us, we haven't had a work-life balance. For most of us, we've experienced multiple burnouts, and we wear our busyness like it's something to be proud of, and so I don't blame them for looking at this and saying, I don't want to buy into that. There's got to be another way forward.
And it's interesting you mentioned that whole element around Gen Z, because those generally are the people who are working in customer experience type roles.
Right.
And I think that's very important to recognize this too. And much like you, I admire them for standing up and saying, I don't want to necessarily go through what my parents went through or what I'm seeing older siblings or family members that they've gone through. And it's true. Like, I mean, I came of age in terms of the workplace in the late 1990s when I started my first jobs in my career. And it was a badge of honor to be working from 7 in the morning. If the boss knew that you were in at 7 in the morning, you'd make a point of sending an email at 7 a.m. to show, hey, look, I'm here at work. This is before the days of remote working and smartphones, etc., or even Blackberries. So look, Lollie, we've touched on a number of things here that I think are really important, especially as we're talking about the front lines. But you brought up the issue of management. And this is where I'm seeing a lot of concerns in the CX industry. And you referenced something that I think is so, so true. It's about actually getting the work done on top of all these meetings that we're being corralled into. And, in some of the off the record discussions I have with my contacts, the biggest issue they seem to have is this constant barrage of demand for video conferencing. The idea that there's an issue, we better organize a Zoom call for 30 minutes. Well, I don't necessarily think that that's the best application of somebody's time. And from the manager's standpoint, from the people who are maybe at the operational level all the way through to the top of some of these CX organizations, if we're going to avoid burnout at the leadership level, what are some of the things that the leaders should not just be thinking about, but maybe insisting on in order to make sure that they're going to be more productive and thereby more healthy in the long run?
Yeah. Well, there are some companies that are working across an asynchronous time zone, so asynchronous engagement. So you've got people in different countries. And some of the things that the initiatives that they're doing are things like recording a small video instead of an email. And that video then is banked and schedule send. So you get a small video that just is 3 minutes of saying, I've got a particular problem or a particular issue. And then you record a video back to it when you get to your time zone and when you're having your work day. And so that's cutting out that 30-minute Zoom. And it's how do we work smarter rather than harder? How do we maximize our time? The majority of stuff that happens in a 30-minute Zoom can actually be summarized incredibly quickly, and you can respond to it. There's not that much that has to be a direct conversation. And actually, the other thing also is to lean into, everyone has a different learning style. It's not this. There's a lot of talk about neurotypical and neurodiversity, but we're actually looking at a spectrum where everybody has a different learning style. You've got some people that are auditory, some people that are visual, some people that are kinesthetic. You've got some people that prefer voice notes, some people prefer WhatsApp or Slack. You've got other people that would prefer an email. So is there a way within your organization that you can sort of say, listen, we've all got Zoom fatigue. We never, imagined that the catchphrase would be you're on mute for the last couple of years, and else. And so is there a way that we can lean into each other's work styles? So, for example, I have a team of 17, and in that team, I know that one person particularly likes an email and a particular format, and I know that another person will leave me a voice note on WhatsApp, and somebody else would prefer a video. And I just work across those different, genres. So we're engaging. Now, it's for me to engage across multiple things, but that's fine. And as a program lead, what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, which style of communication would you prefer? And what works better for you? And then everyone's happy. So I'm not demanding of their time. And so that flexibility is around boundaries, but it's also about respect. The productivity aspect is really interesting because if we're left alone, we're more productive. If we're constantly picked at and pulled into things, we're just going to feel, oh my God, I've got another meeting. I can't do my work. So are all of these 20 hours of meetings necessary? Is there another method that we can communicate this? And so I think it's just having that open conversation, but again, turning that back to the people you're working with to say, okay, listen, how would you prefer that we do this? Having those open conversations to say, I don't have all the answers as a manager. Maybe we could innovate around the idea of having different communication styles or different learning styles. Perhaps there's more leeway. Does it matter? So I was recently in Indonesia. I'm very fortunate to be able to travel with my job. And I'm looking at the digital nomads at the moment. So in Bali and Portugal and Georgia, you've got these particular places that are allowing you to work for 180 days, tax-free, paying tax in your home country, but you can have a different standard of living. So a lot of the tech workers in Dublin, because we've got the top 20 tech companies here because of our great tax breaks, a lot of them, their workers are in Bali on an asynchronous, so this time engagement, right? So they're getting up in the morning, they're living in Bali, living the dream, they're going surfing, they're having a beautiful breakfast on the beach, etc., etc. They're starting work at 4 p.m. They're finishing work at sort of, 9 p.m. or maybe even midnight or something like that. And their standard of living is incredibly high. Just because we have from the Industrial Revolution, we had a 9 to 5 idea of clocking in and clocking out. That's not how it works well for people. If I can get my work done within 4 hours instead of 7 hours, shouldn't I be allowed to? So it's about the productivity aspect. And does it matter when I do that work? Maybe I work in the middle of the night. Maybe I prefer to work in the mornings, So again, that flexibility is really important. We all have a different, some of us are morning people, I would get up quite early. I like to exercise first. And then I have a burst of maybe 3 hours of very intense brain power. And then afterwards, I'd like to do something a bit more creative in the afternoon when I'm a little bit more tired. So I can probably get most of my work done in that 3 hours, but it would fit into a 7-hour Zoom call, or whatever else. So what we did is when the Industrial Revolution caused us to work in a particular way, this idea of clocking on, you're literally punching a clock, a time clock. We haven't moved past that. And so there's some lovely experimentation with the 4-day work week. But what I'm seeing at the moment is it works well for people, but they're working 10 hours a day in those 4 days.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's not alleviating the issue. Yes, they're getting a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but it's not alleviating the issue of burnout. So it's around this idea of developing skills, being given the flexibility, but also recognition and appreciation for getting the job done. Are you saying to your team, how often are you saying to your team, well done? I'm not talking about employee of the week here. I'm talking about an authentic recognition of you did well. And at the flip side of that, you haven't done well, but this failure is a learning opportunity. Or what went wrong? Or how could I support you further? Because this didn't work out for us. So again, it's going back to that team idea of sort of a more authentic leadership and a leadership that actually gives agency and allows those conversations. And it has to, that strong leadership there has to accept feedback to itself. And this is very hard for managers. I'm not talking about, a session where everyone has a go at you. What I'm talking about is a session where you are openly vulnerable to receiving a critique. And working on that to say, okay, I'm not going to take that personally. That is just how this person is perceiving what I'm doing. Can I communicate better or more effectively for their style?
Yeah, what you were saying just a few minutes ago about the Zoom really hit home with me. There was an article that I posted on LinkedIn a couple of days ago from one of the French language papers in Canada, and it was talking about this whole idea about Zoom fatigue, probably one of the best analyses I've ever seen done about the impact of it. And the comment I made, and I think that a lot of managers are starting to really pick up on this because I'm seeing this a lot, is people are just saying, just like take the telephone and phone somebody. Odds are the conversation is going to be a lot shorter. You're going to get right to the point. And because it's not in your calendar for 30 minutes, you don't feel obliged to actually stay on the line that amount of time. It's like done and dusted, just like in the old days. You pick up the phone, you dial, ask the question. Great, thanks, see ya, take care, bye. It's that simple.
And again, this goes back to that interpersonal communication that we may be losing. The current generations don't like phone calls. That's the thing. Yeah. And they like to be messaged, perhaps, so it's a case of what is that style? So can I send you if we're WhatsApping, do we have WhatsApp for work? You look at a country like France that have actually made it illegal to send an email after 5 p.m. or before 9 a.m. I think that's where we should be going. I was in the States last year in New York, and I was talking to some people there, and they were saying that it's not uncommon to not take your holidays And so if we've got a situation where people are not even taking their annual leave as a badge of honor, of course we're going to have burnout. You have to actually take a mental and physical break. It takes about a week to decompress from work. So you need an extra couple of weeks on top of that, you know,
I agree.
And you also need to know you're not coming back to a month's worth of emails. You know, someone's got to manage that workload for you. Yeah, it's very important.
So my last question is around resourcing. And you touched on something a little while ago that I thought was so apropos. On LinkedIn, you see all these beautiful broad pronouncements about how wellness and work-life balance is so important to us. The box ticking exercise, that just encapsulates it perfectly. If I'm a CX company and I'm a leader and I want to make sure that I have everything that's in place for my employees, all the way from the frontline agents through to the supervisors and the middle managers to the leadership, to make sure that they've got what they need to avoid burnout, to avoid stress, what resources would you counsel that a leader puts in place, that they start looking at, to not just say they're doing it, but to actually structurally do something with some substance?
Yeah, I think the difficulty is that wellness sort of tends to be like a wellness day, or, you know, oh, we had wellness week and we all walked in and we all felt vibrant and we had some healthy breakfasts provided, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other 51 weeks of the year was the same old rubbish, right? So, you know, it's got to be streamlined throughout. But it's also got to come from the employees themselves. You know, I think this sort of top-down approach of the leaders knowing what's best doesn't come from this sort of open discussion of what would you like to see or what would be useful. We've got lots of sort of WeWork type places in Dublin now, these sort of, you know, pop-up offices. And I did a talk in one of them, and I walked through the foyer and they were all on yoga mats at sort of 8:30 in the morning. And I was like, is this normal? And they said, oh yeah, no, it's great. And it came out of somebody saying, I feel better sitting at my desk if I've stretched in the morning. So people were coming in earlier for this. But they weren't doing it just, you know, once or twice. They were sort of offering it 2 mornings a week for the full year, you know. And so that came from the employees themselves about sort of, you know, they were getting work-related stress from the computers and different things in terms of their physicality, you know. So people will know what they want. People will know what's good. And I think when it doesn't come from general consensus, or new things aren't tried by managers, it tends to be, oh God, I've got to do this, and it's going to be about wellness. I'll tell you a little story. So when we had this return to work in Google, in the headquarters here, Google brought everyone back in after sort of 18 months. We had one of the most draconian lockdowns during COVID. It brought everyone back into their main headquarters. And so people hadn't been in the office together, so everyone was a bit nervous, you know, and they brought everyone back in the same day. And in that morning, they booked a mariachi band to welcome everybody. And then there was like circus performers and people with balloons, and all of these people are coming in with rucksacks and hoodies going, what the is going on? And there's like this mariachi band in their faces, and they're all like walking through terrified because, you know, we haven't been in a room together for 18 months, you know?
Yeah.
And so that was that kind of approach is what I'm talking about. That sort of, let's throw a party to welcome everyone back, you know, read the room of what people want and how they're going to be, because all anyone was doing was looking absolutely horrified and then sitting at their desks going, I don't know what that was. What was that about, you know? And then realizing, you know, that nothing has changed. Everything is just the same. So, you know, don't implement things that you think are going to be fun without checking in on other people. But also this idea of sort of, you know, work together and play together. Work is work, right? And we don't always want to associate with our work colleagues. And so the idea of sort of bring your full, vulnerable, authentic self to work, I question that as well, because that's not what I'm talking about. We don't want someone sitting at their desk weeping and crying and, you know, affecting their productivity. But at the same time, also, there's got to be a way that that person can be vulnerable and can speak to somebody if necessary. So it's not about bring your whole self from your outside of life. You still have a work persona. You're still there to do a job. There's certain things that have to be achieved and have to be done. Of course, have flexibility and leeway, perhaps in, you know, what you wear or what you do, or, you know, what you can have on your desk or the time that you're working. But as long as their work, you know, their work performance is good, celebrate that, you know, and sort of, I think that we've got to put the humanity back into the workplace, and that's got to come from that open question of what would work better for you, or is this working for you? And if it's not, let's have some suggestions from everyone about what could work better and try them and just see. So that sort of flexible, open approach. When people feel they have agency in their lives rather than dictatorships, they tend to invest more. And the two biggest issues for industry at the moment, every industry, is employee acquisition and employee retention. If you treat your people right and they have a voice, they will stay. And if you see them leaving and you have a high turnover, something's not working.
Perfect. Well, on that note, and I think a very profound note, Dr. Lollie Mancey, thank you so much for taking some time. It's great to catch up with you, and we will look forward to ongoing research and commentary. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I'm Lollie Mancey or Dr. Lollie on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure. It's lovely to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.